Hello, this is the first video in a series on log monitoring with the SaaSfire Monitoring for Kubernetes project. I'm David Stern and this is the Technical Insights and Expertise series. When you're using log messages to troubleshoot an issue in a SaaSfire deployment, sometimes it helps to temporarily increase the level of detail in the log messages produced by a particular SaaSfire service. To show how that works, in this video we'll go through a complete troubleshooting process using the Identities service in SaaSfire for our example issue. Most SaaSfire services have variable log levels which are managed in the same way as this one, and I'll briefly mention one or two exceptions at the end. So I've just started up a new lab environment, and in its startup scripts it deployed an instance of SaaSfire for a fictional company called Gelcore. The identity service in the SaaSfire deployment is supposed to be configured so that it's only accessible to members of the HR group, so just this subset of all of the users that we've created. So let's log into SaaS Environment Manager now as one of those made-up users called Heather. The user ID or password is not valid. Let's try logging in as one of the administrators, GelADM. There's clearly some sort of problem. Let's see if we can find an error message that might help in the logs. In Kibana, signed in as the LogADM user, I've opened up the Discover page. If you've opened it recently, you can find this from the navigation menu here under Recently Viewed, or alternatively you can choose the Open button up at the top here and select the log messages saved search from there. So once we've got that open, let's see if we can filter all of the log messages that we're seeing within the last 15 minutes to just show logs where the log level is error. So I'm going to click on level in the selected fields here, and well, there are no error messages within the top 500 records. So what I'll do is I'll just click the plus button next to one of these other values, and then we'll edit that filter to show log messages for errors rather than debug messages. Save, we'll give it a moment to refresh, and then hopefully we should see some error messages. Okay, let's take a quick look at these and see if any of them are any help. Well, there are clearly some error messages being generated here, but none of them are really anything to do with users or groups, so I don't think this is particularly any help. So, what else can we try? Well, perhaps we can try looking for messages where the log source was the identity service. That's the service in SaaSfire responsible for bringing users and groups in from some external source. So what I'll do is edit this filter, and we're going to change the field that we're filtering on to log source, and we'll look for messages where the log source is identities. And once that's refreshed, we'll see that actually the real name of the log source is SaaS-identities. So I didn't have to type in the exact name of the value I was looking for here in the filter in Kibana. A partial match was okay. So what have we got? Well, there are a couple of messages here. One is saying something about the GelADM identity, but that's not really Heather. And then there are a couple of other messages talking about a refresh of the identity cache starting and finishing successfully, but there's really not enough detail here for us to get any more out of these messages. Let's try seeing if we can log into SaaS Environment Manager as the SaaS boot user, and that's a user which is normally only used for initial configuration. So issues with the identity service fall under that category of initial configuration issues. So we'll log in as this SaaS boot user, which should normally work. That doesn't rely on any external identity provider. And yes, it works. We're in. So let's see what users SaaSfire knows about at the moment. If we click on the Users tab over here, we've got the custom groups that are normally there in the environment, and we have the groups that I would expect to get from our LDAP provider. If we go and click on that and have a look at our groups, that roughly matches, so those look like they're working. And let's have a look at users in SaaSfire. Oh dear, no users were found at all. So what we can try is reloading identities and seeing if we get any more information. So we'll run that command, we'll give it a moment and go back to Kibana and see what we can see here in the logs from SASFire. Okay, so we have got new log messages, but they're really, yeah, they're the same as the previous set of log messages we had before. So we're none the wiser. We're going to need to increase the level of detail in these logs. What we'll do is go back to SAS Environment Manager and we'll have a look at the logging level configuration for the identities service. So that's in the configuration tab. If we go to definitions, we'll be able to find the logging.level configuration definition type. And over on the right hand side, after a moment, we'll see all of the configuration instances that are defined to set logging.level for a particular service. Now there's quite a few in that list, so well, I would expect the identity service to appear roughly here in the list because it's sorted alphabetically and identities is roughly there in the list. We can also search for it this way. So if we do a partial string search, when it finishes catching up, no. So that means that there isn't a specific logging.level configuration instance defined for the identities service. But that's no problem, we can create one. So what we'll do is click this new configuration button up here, and then we can create our new logging.level configuration instance by first of all telling it which services we want this configuration instance to apply to. So we'll search for identities in here. Yep, that should do. There's the identity service and we'll select just that one. The logging.level is pretty straightforward. We want to have the most detailed logging we possibly can for this service, so I'm going to choose trace level logging. But then for this field here, we need to type in the name of a logger, and there's no help in the user interface to tell you what that is. Fortunately, there is a list of loggers which is provided with the actually the SASFire 3.5 documentation. If you search the web for SASFire microservice and web application loggers, you should be able to find this table under logging and monitoring logging reference. But it is part of the SASFire 3.5 documentation at the moment, and I'll include a link to this in the notes to the video. So we want to find a logger for the identity service. If we scroll down a little bit, find I, here we go, identities is right here, and that'll be the logger that we want to use. So I'll copy com.sas.identities and paste that here into the logger name. In fact, I have to use the keyboard for that, Control-V, com.sas.identities. So we've now defined that the identity service should have trace level logging. Done. So let's go back to the users page once that's finished saving, and what we're going to do is tell the identity service to reload its identities again. And this time it should do that, but with much more detailed logs being sent to our logging stack here in Kibana. Hit refresh in here, and hopefully we'll start getting some more detailed log messages. There we go. All right, so they're beginning to come through. And if we scroll down in the table, we can now see that we're getting trace level logging coming through. So let's take a look at these more detailed messages and see what we can find that looks interesting. So there's something here that said fetch returned 0 identities. I think that could be getting towards being a clue. So that is the filter for groups, so that's not what we're after. We want the one for users. Yes, okay. So here is the filter string that we're using to query LDAP to look for users. So POSIX account is one of the attributes of the user object in LDAP. And I think I can see the issue. The name of the HR organizational unit that it's created, or the HR group, has been misspelled in this configuration. So we've found our error, now we can go and fix it in Environment Manager. So we need to go back to the configuration page, and we're going to look for all services at the configuration definitions for, yes, that would be fine, the identity service. And once the configuration definitions that apply to that service have loaded, we'll collapse them all by pressing that button over on the right hand side and find the ones for users. Here it is. Let's edit the configuration definition for users, and we're going to search for the object filter string, which is somewhere around about here in the list. And this is the string which is used to filter the set of users that we bring back from our LDAP provider. And sure enough, here is the group, which should be just called HR, and we can see the typo that I've got in there. So if I just edit that to remove the spelling mistake, the group is now correctly called HR. We'll save our changes, and we should then be able to go back and refresh or reload the list of users again, and hopefully we'll have slightly better results. So we'll give that just a moment to load, and then I'll go and choose Reload Identities, hit yes, and after a minute, hopefully that will reload the identities with that improved configuration setting. Let's hit refresh, and sure enough, we've got the users we expected. So I expected to get about 10 users or so, because there are roughly 10 users in our HR group. So that looks great. They're not sorted into quite the same order here in SASFire as they are in LDAP, but that's okay, it is the same set. So that really illustrates the beginning to end process of solving a problem, except for one very important last step, which is that we still have trace level logging enabled for the identity service. So we mustn't forget to go and turn that off again. Let's go back to SAS Environment Manager, and in configuration we're going to go back to the definitions view and find logging.level again, and we'll see this logging configuration instance, which is set to when it finishes loading. Yep, so now we can find that logging configuration instance which defines trace level logging for the identity service. So one thing that might seem strange is that you can't actually delete a configuration instance in this user interface of SAS Environment Manager. Our objective here is to restore the default logging level for the identity service to the info level, and there are actually two ways that you can do it. One of those ways is that we can edit this configuration instance and just change the logging level to info, which is the default anyway, and that will absolutely do what we expect, will totally work, and it's probably the simplest way to change the logging configuration. But there is another way that you can do it if you're comfortable using the SASFire command line interface, there's the CLI. So let's see not just how to change that logging log level configuration instance to info, but actually how to remove it completely and allow the service to just go back to the default. So we'll switch to a terminal window here, and in this terminal I should mention that I've already authenticated to the SASFire CLI as GelADM, which in this environment is a user in the SAS administrators group, and I've also made sure that the ANSI colors enabled setting in the SASFire CLI profile is set to false or off. And the standard documentation for the SASFire CLI explains that all much better than I could here, so please take a look at that, and I'll put links to that in the notes as well. So the commands that I'm going to run here you can also find in the notes that accompany this video to save you typing them out. And this first one I'm going to run is a little bit complicated. It's really made up of two commands. So here inside this $ and round brackets is a subcommand that's going to run, let's just run that on its own. So that is going to run the SASFire command line interface, and it's going to output as text. It'll run the configuration plugin and use the configurations command within that and the list subcommand to list all configuration instances in this version of SASFire. We'll then grep the results of that to look for identities and also logging.level. And the last thing is just going to print out the first field of that result, which is just the ID of that configuration instance. And actually you can see that that ID, so it ends here in 2C26, is the same as the configuration instance that we've been editing here. So we're looking at the same thing. And then the sort of full part of the command takes that ID, which we get by running one SASFire command, and passes it in as an argument to another configurations delete command. So we'll be deleting the SASFire configuration instance that is returned by the subcommand. So let's run that whole command. It says the deletion of that configuration instance is complete. So, did it work? Let's go back to SAS Environment Manager And we'll take a look at the configuration definitions for logging.level. If we refresh those and select logging.level again, let's collapse these over on the right-hand side. And sure enough, the configuration definition for the identity service is gone. So that means that the logging.level for the identity service should have reverted back to its default. So let's see if it worked. We'll go back to the users page, reload identities again. So let's do that and hit yes. And then as that runs, we'll go back to Kibana and we'll refresh in Kibana and we'll see what level of log messages are coming through now. See if it's picked up that change just yet. So that's refreshing. And yep, it looks like so let's look at the timestamp for these messages. These are all info level messages. There's no trace level login. So that 11:31, that was the last time we ran it. It's now 11:37 or just after 11:35. So yes, we're just getting info level log messages here at the moment. So basically the change to the logging configuration has worked. So we've seen how to delete a configuration instance defining a log level from the command line, but what if you wanted to create it from the command line as well? Well, yep, you can do that too. So this is a little bit more complicated. We need to run a command to create a configuration instance that accepts a file, a JSON file defining what that configuration instance will be. And first of all, we're going to need to create that file. So let's run a little bit of code here that will create that. And this code basically just defines a JSON file in the correct structure to set up a configuration instance for logging. So we'll copy that and paste it into the terminal session here, and we can just list that file to make sure that it contains the content we want and is formatted correctly. Yep, looks good. And then we'll run a second command to load that file in and use it to create a new configuration instance. So again, we'll copy that and go run this command here. It says that post is complete, so we have completed loading up that file into the configuration service. And if we go back into SAS Environment Manager, in the configurations page, we'll refresh, choose logging level again, and once it's finished loading up the configurations, we can collapse those, and hopefully we'll see that there is an identities service configuration, exactly like the one we had before. It just has a new ID. So that's it. We've seen how you can change the logging level of a SASVIRE microservice and how that affects the log messages that we can see in Kibana, the log monitoring tool that's part of the SASVIRE Monitoring for Kubernetes project. We also saw how to set and delete the logging.level configuration instances from a service from the SASVIRE command line. And that's useful because deleting the configuration instance is one of two possible ways to restore the service's default logging level. And again, you don't have to delete the configuration instance to restore the default log configuration. You can just edit it and set it back to the default level, which is info. So that would also work and produce the same effect. One final thing, as I said at the beginning, most services in SASVIRE have variable log levels, just like the identity service, but there are a few exceptions. So the CAS service has got its own definition. If you find the definition for a CAS server, so here's CAS shared default, and we collapse configurations for those, one of them is called logconfig, and that includes in its definition an XML document describing how the log configuration should work for that CAS server, and there's a separate one for each CAS server. There currently isn't a documented way to change the logging configuration for the SAS programming runtimes, so that's things like the compute, connect and batch servers, but I'd expect we'll see ways to change those in the future. And finally, SASVIRE also includes a number of infrastructure servers. So that's things like the SAS configuration server, the infrastructure data server, the message broker, and one or two others. And they all have their own logging capabilities, and they vary in whether and to what extent you can alter their logging. So I hope this has been useful. For more SaaSfire tips and tricks, take a look at the other videos in the SaaS Technical Insights and Expertise series, and watch out for more videos from me on log monitoring in SaaSfire Monitoring for Kubernetes.